When did your something is very wrong here feeling turned out to be true? Story 1. Came home from school one Wednesday and parked in front of my house per usual. Across the street, in another house's driveway, are both residents, boyfriend and girlfriend, with the girlfriend laying on the cement with what looked like blood spatter and the boyfriend consoling her. Her purse and contents were thrown all over the driveway. I stopped and did a double take as something didn't seem right, but I wasn't positive if it was blood I was seeing or wet cement. As a dumb high schooler, I didn't think to ask if she was all right and went on with my day. The following day, when I got back from school, there was yellow caution tape and a crime scene revolving around their driveway. It turns out the girl had passed away in her sleep that night from head trauma. I ended up having to tell our police chief what I saw the previous day and give a full statement. My statement was different than what the boyfriend said happened. Edit. Since some of you are calling me an idiot for not directly going to the police, I was not positive if I was seeing wet cement or blood. It was about 40 feet away from me. I live in the suburbs with wide streets and longish driveways. No, there was not a pool of blood around her head as some of you are insinuating. Only small amounts of splatter, which could have easily been water since it was not there the next day. She was not dead on the driveway, nor was she unconscious, just knocked down with purse contents scattered. Some of y'all must have reading problems. Story 2. 10 years ago, I was walking home from college. Finals week, and being a graphic design, major my bag is full of projects and in supplies to work on at home. I'm at the intersection of two very quiet streets 2 blocks from my apartment. I see a car doing 30 miles per hour coming my direction. 2 guys are in the car, which is a new Chrysler with huge flashy rims and tinted windows. It was not what I'm used to seeing around campus at all. Most students are driving bikes or old Hondas. It honestly looked like a stereotypical candy dealer's car. I see the driver's head bend to look at me through the tint as they drove past. Red flag #1, so I turn off my music, take out my earbuds, and start paying attention to what's going on. Another student is crossing the street, and I'm turning the corner to walk to my apartment. The Chrysler starts to brake. One guy hops out and kind of stands in the street looking around like he's searching for something. Red flag #2. He's the jump-out boy and lookout. The other guy, the driver, must be the muscle. The other student is still walking, so she's not in danger, but jump-out boy is just standing there in lookout mode. The car parks and the other guy, a very large young man, not muscle, is heading my way fast. Am I going to get mugged today? I decide to test him a bit. Maybe I'm just paranoid. I cross the street casually and watch in the reflection of car windows to see what he's doing. He crosses with me, nearly jogging. That's red flag #3, and now I'm flipping pissed off. I walk another block and cross back again so that I'm on the same side of the street as my building. Big boy crosses again, trying to narrow the gap between us. Cool. He's going to try and mug me. At least my intuition was right. What I did next was not smart. I should have sprinted home and locked the door and called somebody. I was young, in great shape, and had been taking martial arts, so I took a risk which is contrary to all of my martial arts training. I get to the entrance of my apartment complex and took off my bag. I opened it, took out my box cutter, I was matting photos that night, and stood there waiting for the guy to catch up. Big boy sees me, sees my box cutter, and just freezes, then turns around and walks back the way he came. Slowly, with his head down. Always trust your gut, but if you can run from a fight, do it. Story 3. For some reason, everything kept falling on this one day, July 16th. I had appointments rescheduled to that day. There was a barbecue that got moved to that day. Everything kept landing on that say. I said to my boyfriend at the time, everything is pointing me to this day. Something is going to happen. Well, that morning I took my friend to her appointment. It ran a bit late, but I could have still returned to work. But I didn't want to go to the BBQ, so I went home early instead. I got home about 3 hours earlier than I usually do, just in time to witness my father have a massive stroke. I knew something was going to happen that day. And on top of that, I got pregnant a month after my father passed away, so 2 months after the stroke. And my daughter was born on July 16th, 1 year later. Story 4. When I was 11, my family went to hang out at my cousin's house for the day. My sister had decided to stay home. I had a sour feeling in my stomach the minute we got on the freeway. A few hours pass, and my grandma calls my uncle's house. This was before cells were common, and asked to have my parents call her back as they had left with my aunt and uncle. So my parents called her back and left saying they would be back for us kids. I just remember sitting on my cousin's bed thinking my sister is dead. Turns out she had an asthma attack, and on her way down the stairs, she passed out. She aspirated and was DOA when the paramedics arrived. We had only been gone about 4 hours. Story 5. Jimmy Saville. I was working in Leeds when he passed away, and he was given. Guy always creeped me out, but the funeral was outrageous. Gold coffin, big crowds, buried at an angle so he could see the sea from within his grave. For those outside the UK, he assaulted and molested hundreds of people. Boys and girls, women, people who were ill, possibly even people who were dead. He abused his position as a celebrity and as a fundraiser for hospitals to volunteer, and was left alone with people at their most vulnerable. He was a monster. It is easy to forget that he wasn't always thought of as a monster. Story 6. I worked at a fast food restaurant, and I got an antsy phone call from my dad telling me to come home ASAP. There were storms on the way, and he was nervous about the timing. I thought he was being paranoid until I got this really uneasy feeling as well. Every nerve in my body was telling me to get home right now. I pissed off the manager when I left without mopping the floors. I rushed home, and I had barely gotten into the door for 2 minutes before a tornado hit our house. Looking back on it, if I didn't leave when I did, I would have been driving along the road the tornado followed, and I probably wouldn't be here. I got written up at work for leaving without completing my tasks, but a write-up is better than being dead. Story 7. In high school, there were these two guys that were best friends. They always hung out with each and the other goth kids, except they were not exactly goth like the others. They wore military camo, jackboots, that sort of thing. I always had this weird feeling about them. They so stereotypically looked like they would shoot up the school. Well, after school was out in May of 2006, I was outside and heard this string of popping sounds way off. Fireworks, I thought, lots of them, and continued on about my day. Turns out had opened fire on the police station about a mile away with an AK. My HS was about a mile from that police station. He terminated one officer and injured 2 others. The guy I always saw him with turned out to be pretty tame and had nothing to do with this. I only mention him because I always saw the two together. Story 8. Buying candy in Cuba when I was 16. Super nice guy, one of the first people I had met in Cuba, had only been there 2 weeks. I asked him for candy. He was like, OMG, I sell candy? He's like, I just gotta pick it up from my house. I was no problem. You are a friend. This isn't weird. So, we enter the house, but part of the side wall is blown out into a doorway to connect all the houses on the street. I would say there is about 10. So, we are walking through these houses. It's just old Cubans watching TV. We get to the last house. It's the only one that has a door. He tells me, okay, I'm just going to get the stuff. You wait here. He enters. I hear him lock the door. I get the, oh, I'm about to get robbed feeling. I turn around, I see all the doorway we're passing now have doggy gates to prevent a quick getaway. So I bolt. I'm doing some Olympic vaulting over these doggy doors. I hear the door swing open. My friend lacks candy yet has a knife, so I speed up. Old Cuban women are attempting to grab me. They are getting an American 16-year-old stiff arm to the face. I get to the street. He is right on my tail. Book it about 5 more blocks, I see a cop. Basically power slide behind him. Look up, I see my friend halfway up the block. Gasps. Turns around. Yeah, I made it to base. The Cuban cop said something to me. I don't speak any Spanish. So I just shrugged and walked in the opposite direction. Never saw my friend after that. Story 9. 1987. I was driving north on 101 in Calif around 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. When I was in college, my entire family had been in a car accident and was in the hospital in the Bay Area. I decided to stay in the fast lane so I would wake up if I dozed off and hit the bumper lights that stick up on either side of that lane. As I was driving, had a bad feeling my life was in danger. Out of the blue, a voice coming from the passenger side of the car said, "Move over to the other lane." I was so startled I said out loud, "What?" It repeated itself, "Move over to the other lane." So, I didn't think I just changed lanes. As soon as I completed my lane change, a car, going south, wrong direction, at least 100 miles per hour, came over the rising hill in front of me and zip went past me. This was before cell phones. I pulled over at the next exit and found a payphone to call the highway patrol. They said they had heard of this drunk drive and had been trying to locate him for a while. I sat in my car a good 15 minutes to finally stop shaking and continue on. Will never forget that experience as long as I live. Story 10. I would have to say child molesters give off a creepy vibe almost each and every time. My wife and I moved into a new apartment, and this guy sat on his balcony watching us the whole time. Once we were done, he came up and introduced himself when no one else did. This dude stayed up late and got up early, always playing his guitar and playing with his 4 birds. One night, the cops shut down our complex for an incident related to some candy crime. The officer comes by around 2 a.m. and interviews each resident. We tell him we knew nothing, but the guy downstairs is just super weird. The officer said that 4 residents already said that, too. The following Monday, his door is busted down and he's arrested for multiple counts of child-censored photos. Story 11. My mom was sick and battling some long-term complications from type 1 diabetes when I was a teenager. One year, she felt well enough to plan Thanksgiving for our extended family at my aunt's house. But when the time dinner came around, she didn't feel well enough to go. After dinner, we called the house and got no answer. My sister and I drove home, and throughout that drive, something just felt off to me. When we got home, we found our mom, who had passed away. Her heart had apparently given out. Edited to add. Every single unanswered phone call to a loved one gives me an insane amount of anxiety now. Story 12. We had a neighbor who made me feel very uncomfortable. One day, he leaned in the doorway of my bedroom, and I got an immediate, "Get the fudge out of here" vibe. I turned, walked under the weird loop bridge he was making with his arm, all without responding to him. He asked, "Where are you going?" My family was with his. These families had been friends for about 35 years at this point, and he knew I was alone. I was a 9-year-old boy. He was a 30-year-old man. The second I rounded the corner, I ran out of the house and rejoined the cookout. He was later convicted of molesting his son, who was about my age, and I'd already been molested once in my life by someone else, so my mind was like, dude, I can only suppress so much. Get the fudge out of here now. Story 13. I had a funny feeling on the bus on the way back from college to where I was living. The next day, same feeling. Found out there was a guy watching me from the back of the bus. I changed my routes that week, and somehow he always appeared in the same bus as me, even if I was taking different ones. Told my parents, who just brushed me off as paranoid. They were too busy with their divorce. Until on Friday that week, I decided to hop off at a different stop, which was a lot more busy than mine. And the guy tried to grab me by my backpack. I ducked, ran into a flower shop, told the salespeople a creep was following me and had tried to grab me. They let me in the back, where I called my mom, who came to pick me up. Thankfully, after this, I was able to get a car. To this day, I'm hypervigilant in any sort of public transportation. Story 14. I came home one day, walked into my apartment, and came to a dead stop. Something was off, but I couldn't immediately tell what it was. Door was locked like normal. Nothing was out of place. There was nothing that I could see that would make me think something was wrong. I did some looking around and still couldn't find anything wrong, until I found a note on my counter saying that maintenance had stopped by to make sure a leak from the floor above hadn't also affected my apartment. I still have no idea what caused me to know that something was different, but clearly my subconscious picked up on something out of place. Edit. I find the comments about me smelling something to be funnier than hell. I'm not saying they're wrong, but I have a hugely decreased sense of smell and can rarely identify the scent of a candle directly under my nose, let alone something as vague as another person being in the room hours earlier. Again, not saying it's wrong, just funny to me. Story 15. Working with ammonia refrigeration, we had a leak in a hot gas line around 120 psi and had a huge pump out of the header planned. Over 100 valves, and due to the location of the leak, the closest we could pump out from was 2 rooms away. Well, the pump-out valves were assigned over 2 different shifts and 4 people, and the pump-out was supposed to be carried out by 3rd shift. The plan was flawed from the start. There were 2 valves that were missed, and on top of that, there were 3 others that were still tagged from other pump-outs that weren't closed. The 3rd shift guy wasn't able to get the pressure to drop, so he starts throwing valves on the control bank he was working on. Contractors show up and see the pump-out point is in vacuum and go to cut the line, 2-inch HG line. They're about to cut it with a portaband, and I stop them. I just had a bad feeling that Cal was about to go south. I ask them to drill a pilot hole, which they should have done anyway. They pull out a 1/2-inch drill bit. I tell them to use a 16th bit, but the smallest they've got is a 5/16. They drill in and pee. Hot gas hits us all in the face. 3rd shift guy had isolated where we were pumping out from what we wanted to pump out. There were 4 of us on the catwalk that got blasted with anhydrous ammonia, and I was the only one that had a mask. We gasp and feel our way to the door, and when we get out, there were only 3 of us. I had to mask up and go looking for a body. The guy had gotten out from a different door and was okay. Leak persisted for an hour and a half as I went through and checked every valve on our pump-out list, and then walked every line that tied in with the leaking one. Story 16. Well, I was in Air Cadets when I was a lot younger. It was in a rural town. I lived in a smaller one about 20 minutes away from that town and went to a different school than a lot of the people there. So I never saw them outside of cadets, but I liked them a lot. I got pretty close with this one guy there, whose brother was actually one of our sergeants, and they were both really good guys. We'll call them Bob and Jeff. Jeff being the older sergeant brother. One morning I heard about a car accident that had 4 high school students involved, in which one of them had actually passed away. You know when you get that feeling of complete dread and you know exactly why, but have no idea why you know? Yeah, it was that. I knew full well that it was Jeff, but just completely doubted my head, thinking, there are about 300 minus 400 kids in that school. That's a pretty small chance. Well, this has been the time where I hated being right the most. I kind of lost contact with Bob as I left cadets and went to school. He was a year younger than me, so I popped in every now and then, but we stopped talking. I'm not sure if he's doing okay, but I know he was a pretty reckless driver. All I wish is that his dad doesn't have to bury 2 sons. Story 17. Not me, but my wife. She had just given birth to our first child, and we had been discharged home to rest and settle down with the old 3 hours after delivery. As I'm settling down to bed, she is checking the child and saying that something isn't right. We call the hospital and are informed that everything is fine. All sounds normal and not to worry. Wife still isn't satisfied, so keeps calling the hospital and being told the same thing. After a few more calls, they say that a midwife can come later in the day or to take him to AE if we want to waste our time. Wife is determined something isn't right, so we head over to AE to get child checked out. The on-call pediatrician arrives, takes one look at our son, and runs off with him, telling the nurse to lead us to NICU. As we arrive, he has flatlined, and a horde of DRs and nurses are doing everything they can to resuscitate him. We're taken to a side room and told to prepare for the worst. Thankfully, they got him going again, and after 11 days in intensive care, we could take him home again. If we had been any later getting to the hospital, our son would have passed away in our home or the car. The SOS intuition was spot on, and I'll never second-guess her again. Story 18. I work in a casino located in a pretty small city. We're dead a lot, so I often find myself twiddling my thumbs and waiting for something to do. As a dealer, I'm often just stuck in one spot. I kept seeing this older guy walking past my table, and he was pretty obviously trying to keep himself hidden. A young lady was playing a slot machine, and he seemed to be watching her. He would move away, walk around for a minute, and then come back and watch her some more. It freaked me out. I had a really bad feeling about what his intentions were. I called my pit boss over, who also had nothing to do, and we watched him for a few minutes as he lurked around. My pit boss agreed that he was acting strange, and he ended up calling surveillance. Later that night, I heard from a security guard that the man had tried to follow the woman outside to her car, but security was on his peach like white on rice. I didn't really get credited for anything, but I still felt like I did a good deed that day. Story 19. I was walking into my apartment. I was in a bad mood and I think a bit high, and I was feeling anxiety with each person I passed. Right before I turned into my complex, there was this guy who passed me going the opposite way. My body shied away from him as it had been shying away from everybody else. But his attention seemed to lock on to that movement, and I felt him eyeing me out of the corner of his eye as we passed. Suddenly, I felt a big fear of this guy as I turned into the courtyard of my building. On a sort of autopilot, my body stopped over and scooped up a big rock, about the size of a grapefruit, from the garden. I picked it up and turned around and stood there. The guy comes around the corner. He has turned around to follow me, and stops dead. I stand there and he looks at me. In focusing on feeling the weight of the rock on my hand. "What are you doing with that?" he says. "I'm just standing here." "Why?" "I live here." "Do you?" "No," he says, and goes on his way. I knew that bad person was going to turn around and follow me. I'm glad I trusted my gut. Story 20. I have 2 that come to mind. 1. In 2010, the daughter of our long-term family friend began a steady relationship with a guy. The family was constantly talking about how kind he was, but when I saw pictures, he absolutely gave me the willies. Shortly after their relationship began, I had a vivid dream in which the girl, Mariah, was getting abused by the guy. I called up my mom and asked her to call Mariah's mom to see if she was okay. She did, and everything was all right, until 5 years later on Mariah's wedding night. Immediately after the ceremony, when her and her new husband got back to the hotel room, he attempted to strangle her to death, because as it turned out, he had made a tremendous life insurance claim in her name. 2. In 2016, a perverted candy-addicted young man, Garrett, had become interested in my straight brother. Garrett told my brother that he could not only get him candy, but introduce him to an unnamed blonde girl who wanted close relationship with him. One night, my reclusive brother just walked out of the house without saying anything. Alarm bells went off in my mind, so I got dressed and followed him down the road, where he was being beckoned by a car full of teenagers to get in. When I arrived, they screamed and cursed at me as they drove off, and my brother was upset. This happened several times. The one time I failed to catch the event, my brother got molested by Garrett. Oh, and the kids wanting my brother to get in with them? Story 21. I woke up on Christmas Eve at around 3 or 4 in the morning. I was roughly 9 years old at the time. At first, I wasn't sure why I woke up, but I had a bad feeling. It wasn't long until I started to hear my mom saying, "Please, God, help me," etc. I got out of bed and went and found her in the bathroom. What I saw next can best be described as the blood scene from Carrie. She was lying on the bathroom floor, covered in blood. Blood all over the bathroom carpet. I know, flipping carpet. The toilet, the shower, and pretty much anywhere else it could get. It was a mixture of bright red and dark, almost black-colored blood. It was only her and me at home. Needless to say, I was flipping terrified, being a small boy. I tried to call 911, but she wouldn't let me. It took a lot of convincing before she finally let me call her best friend to come take her to the hospital. It turns out she had a bleeding ulcer, which wouldn't have gone this far if she hadn't ignored the previous pain. A few days in the hospital, and she was good to go, but it's something I'll never forget. I had my mom's friend take me home the next day and cut up all that carpet. The subfloor looked like someone had been murdered. Edit: I said my mom a lot in this, so I changed some to her or she. Story 22. Here's a weird one. Probably responded too late for anyone to notice, but oh well. In high school, a couple of my friends and I were downtown drinking, generally just being stupid, irresponsible, dumb teenagers. Then someone invited out us to a party across town. We were all set to go and got in the car when suddenly I just got this awful feeling and told everyone we were already being irresponsible and shouldn't push our luck and we should just go home. Managed to convince everyone to go home, so we did. Next day in high school, we found out another guy who we weren't even hanging out with ended up going to that same party super drunk, wrapped his car around a tree, and passed away instantly. He was on the same road we would have been driving on. During lunch, all of us just sat in silence, knowing that could have been us. It almost seemed like it should have been us. Fudge me up thinking about it sometimes. Story 23. I was 26 weeks along in my pregnancy and stopped feeling the baby move, like something was legitimately wrong. Went to LD and they say everything is fine, baby is moving perfectly, and the nurse even chastised me for paying attention to kick counts. I tell her I can see that the baby is moving on the monitor. Looks like a mini seismograph. But I don't feel it at all, and I had been feeling her plenty in the last 2 months. She asks if I want an ultrasound so I can feel better, and I say no because I'm embarrassed. My ex-husband tells the nurse that we do want the ultrasound sound, and then tells me I shouldn't feel ashamed for my concerns. I get the ultrasound, see the baby moving, and feel even more stupid for wasting resources. Everything looks fine, and they discharge us. That night, my midwife calls and says I need to go to see a perinatologist first thing in the morning. Just for a second scan, everything is fine. The next morning, I went for the scan and found out I had reason to be concerned. In the 6 weeks since I had my 20-week anatomy scan, my placenta had developed a rapidly growing tumor called a chorioangioma, vascular tumor of the placenta. I was told to go check into LD immediately. I was put on monitors and bed rest. Cow ton of tests and scans every day. The fact the tumor hadn't been recognizable 6 weeks before and now was about as big as the baby was pretty scary, and outcomes are pretty dire. On the 4th morning in the hospital, I was rushed into emergency surgery. Her biophysical profile had dipped below the threshold for the test, and she needed to be delivered or she would pass away in utero. She was worse than they thought when I was rushed into surgery. Her little heart had been struggling so hard to get blood. The tumor was effectively shunting it away from her, and her body development was more the size of a 24 seeker. She was resuscitated several times after birth and had a complicated first several months. I distinctly recall the surgeon calling for a camera and several exclamations of how large my placenta was. The tumor was 15 cm, 8 cm, 7 cm. It had to be removed in several pieces, and ended up getting sent to 2 major research hospitals. I was occasionally addressed as the chorioangioma mom because our case attracted quite a few specialists. My chorioangioma is the largest on record without adverse fetal outcome. At least that's what I was told. If I hadn't gone when I did, and if we didn't get the ultrasound, my daughter wouldn't be alive. She is doing much better now, spent 101 days in the NICU, and is just small in stature, as far as I know. Story 24. My mom used to own a handmade crafts consignment shop. She had me watch it for her every once in a while. One day this guy comes in, looks homeless and hippie, like the kind that chooses homelessness as a lifestyle. He had just socks on and a bag. He seemed high. We talked for a couple hours. He went on and on about how the universe feels like it's not real and about different planets or other universes. Obviously way out of touch with reality. He didn't seem like he was going to hurt me. I never felt threatened, however. I got this really flipping strong gut feeling, like this guy was just off somehow. He told me he didn't like using names. Can't recall why exactly, but I asked if I could come up with a name to call him. He was fine with it. I thought for a moment. I really wanted to pick one that really felt like it matched the guy. I kept coming back to Michael. Wasn't sure if that was bias or not, since that was my favorite name. The only other name I considered was David. I went with Michael. Eventually, I had to ask him to leave because I needed to close. Later, I told my parents all about this guy, and they told the owner of the building. He banned the guy. They were annoyed that I didn't kick him out sooner because of that strong feeling I had. The owner also saw the guy and didn't like the looks of him. A couple of weeks later, the owner sent an email to my parents. It was a police report. This guy had broken into someone's apartment and was found standing over the bed of a little girl. He hadn't done anything at the point they found him, so no one knows what he was going to do, but frickin' creepy. The weirdest part that really got to me was his name was Michael David something. Can't remember the last name. I had guessed his name spot on. It creeped me the fudge out. Story 25. I love hiking. I read hiking subs, magazines, browse gear websites, watch YouTube videos, etc. At one point, I was able to hike 3-4x a week. I'm always excited for a hike, and as soon as I get to the parking lot, all my real-life troubles seem to fade away. Literally feels like a weight off my shoulders. Except one day last summer, I was in the parking lot gearing up with a buddy. We got our packs set and boots on and set off for the trail. The second my foot left the parking lot, I was overwhelmed with a sudden feeling of dread. I couldn't explain it even to myself, and I commented to my friend that it was odd that for some reason I just really did not feel like hiking today. It was odd because the weather was near perfect sunny conditions and we were by the water with a nice breeze. I've also done this exact trail 3 times and have pretty much memorized everything about it. Anyways, we hike for maybe an hour and decide to climb some rocks. There's not much else to it, so it may seem anticlimactic with that buildup, but I was going first ahead of him and I grabbed a massive rock to pull myself ahead. The kind of rock that's so big you just assume it's part of the mountain. It wasn't. As soon as I put my weight on it, this rock came loose, and I immediately pushed all my weight to keep it steady while my buddy moved out of the way. I checked the trail below for children or passerbys, as the trail is very popular before maneuvering away and letting the rock go. As soon as I turn my head back to the rock, it slips, and I have no idea how, but I managed to move my entire body out of the way of danger. It fell maybe 50 or so feet to the trail and shattered. The adrenaline was pumping, so I didn't feel anything except an odd, wet feeling on my left hand. Why is my hand wet, I thought. Soon as I looked, there was blood leaking out and fast. It ended up being only a minor injury when I made it to the ER. Shattered pinky bone literally splintered an entire chunk off, and it crushed but didn't break my ring finger. But the amount of blood and visible bone was ridiculous. I almost passed out, but luckily realized I'm miles from a road and bleeding, so I made a tourniquet out of my shirt, and luckily my buddy had a towel to apply to the wound to stop the bleeding. I called the park control, who actually decided to dispatch a Coast Guard unit to assist me since we were so close to the water. The bad news was there was a solid 1/4 mile of strictly off-limits section that was absolutely not safe for anyone to attempt to climb, as it was full of loose rocks. I was bleeding like crazy, and with the adrenaline pumping, I didn't even think I just acted. I literally slid down these boulders like water trickling down a stream, as I had one hand incapacitated, and the other was stopping the bleeding, so I kind of just had to lay against the rock and slide down it basically to avoid dying. The drop was very far, and in hindsight, I could have easily lost my life trying to get to that oh-no boat when I should have just walked the 3-4 me trail back to my truck. Anyways, the rest is short. Coast Guard picks me up and calls an ambulance, and I safely make it to the ER. End up destroying my hand with a large rock and shattering my pinky bone to pieces. 3-month recovery, and my pinky locks up from time to time now when gripping things or playing guitar. Oh well. Edit. White Shore Trail in Alpine NJ if anyone cares. Very popular scenic spot, but do not fudge with the rocks. The trail clearly avoids them for a reason. Story 26. First time in Winnipeg, going to a pawn shop. Turned onto the main street, and something subconscious started going off in my brain. Danger! The general area, people's movements, whatever. I parked and got out to go search for a game system. All my alarm bells were going off that something about this area was not okay. A fight broke out seconds later. Nothing too serious. Fists, no weapons. I went into the pawn shop. Inside were construction guys. Greasy-looking Russian dudes in suits. A group of homeless-looking meth heads and a biker gang. Or something like it. They were younger. Everyone knew each other and were just hanging out in this place of business, and people were coming and going into the back room like it was nothing. There was a wall of PlayStation 4s and Xbox 360 AS. Context: every other pawn shop in the city was out of stock. I knew it was a criminal meetup, sweets, weapons, electronics. Don't care. Later confirmed by several local shop owners. Anyway, as I bailed, a second fight broke out. I got in my car and left the city and will never go back. Story 27. Had that feeling around a technical theater teacher. He smoked and didn't care if the kids in his class did, cursed like a roadie, and a myriad of other laid-back things that seemed really cool to his high school students. I was a senior-year transfer student and had done a lot of backstage work previously, including a couple of professional-ish paying gigs, but like off, we'll pay you in pizza for the extra rehearsals off Broadway shows. His laid-back attitude when dealing with stage work, lighting, and pyrotechnics, even the dinky little nonsense they let into high schools, gave me a really bad gut feeling. And sure enough, he was assaulting his students. Story 28. Wouldn't say something wrong. Had an urge to call my brother. We didn't ever talk on the phone. Not that we weren't close. We'd catch up when I came back into town. By catch up, we would spend every night out with both of our groups of friends. We have a very close family. I call and one of his roommates answers, but I didn't recognize the voice. I ask for him. He asks who it is. Not completely odd since I never call. I tell him JB. Silence for 10 seconds and I'm told, "He can't come to the phone, JB. I'll have him call you." The way I was told was very odd, nice but dismissive, especially since I know his roommates. Oh, well, maybe he'll call later, and I head out to a chili cook-off. Come home and my roommate says very somber, "You have a message." He stands by me while I play it back. "Hey, JB, it's Mom. Your brother passed away." Went up for the funeral and dropped by his old house. I asked his good friend, "Why didn't you just tell me when I called?" He got wide-eyed and said, "That was you? We thought it was Johnson." You never call. Johnson shares my first name. Johnson was a friend of my brother's who would call regularly. I called just as the police arrived. The officer answered the phone. Officer asked them, "Who is JB?" They assumed it was Johnson, not me. His brother. His friends didn't think to grab the phone and let me know edit. He passed away of unknown causes, fell asleep and didn't wake up. Also, Mom was not cold with the message, disconnected, but the message was said with tears and went on longer. Plus, she used his name, not just asterisk, your brother asterisk. Story 29. I got a meeting request once with no explanation or prompting. Just a meeting with my boss and cost account manager for 1 week away. I immediately assumed that I was going to get fired. I had no reason to think so, as I had just received glowing reviews on my yearly assessment, as well as a big fat raise. I can even remember the night before thinking, I may as well enjoy this board game as I'm going to get fired tomorrow and things are going to get hectic. Turns out I was right. Well, not strictly. It was a contract non-renewal notice, which meant I had like 6 months to find a new job. Turned out to be the best thing that had ever happened to me. I loved the job, but my love for that job blinded me to just how messed up that work environment was. Ended up jumping into a bigger pond on a significantly more prestigious product where the engineers actually know what they're doing. Story 30. Super late to the party, but I have a really good one. It happened to my best friend since childhood, not me. We were both about 19 at the time, and she had moved out into her first apartment. She also likes to breathe candy, so she'd often spend a few minutes smoking a bowl in her car before going inside. Well, one day she got home and was sitting in her car with her window half rolled down and a truck pulls up behind her, effectively blocking her in. The guy starts telling her, "Hey, you have a flat back tire?" Sensing something was off, she rolled up her window a bit more and said, "Oh, thank you for telling me." The guy is just waiting there, and when she doesn't get out to look, he got a bit agitated. Trying to continue the conversation, he asks her if she wants some help fixing it and says he has tools and a patch kit. She still stands her ground and says, "No, that's all right. I will have my roommate come down and look at it." The guy continues to insist he can help her get it done really quick. He has everything they need to do the job. She says no thank you and rolls up the window. Guy gets pissed off, slams the door and drives away finally. She waited a few minutes to be 100% sure he was gone before getting out. Lo and behold, she did not have a flat tire. Story 31? Well, here we go. Been a firefighter for 4 years now, and I remember back when I was on my 3rd or 4th fire ever. I was 18 at the time. We had this huge 3-story house catch of fire at about 7 a.m. I was with the first truck there, and we were the first guys in the house. Our lieutenant said it was just a small fire and to go in and knock it down. He had already surveyed the area around the house, which was really messy. I could tell something was off right at the start. I had a bad feeling in my stomach. Me and this guy who had been a firefighter for about 5 years went in, and I noticed it was really hot. Like really hot, which was weird as we couldn't see and fire, and the breathe outside indicated that it was a relatively small fire. We moved in further, and everything suddenly got really dark with breathe and even hotter. I stopped and thought a second and remembered to use my other senses since I can't see, and realized my feet felt hot, almost like they were on fire. Bad sign, as it shouldn't be that hot near the bottom of the floor. I knew we had to back out soon. Suddenly, our captain, who is now at the fire, tells us to get your asses out of there now, followed by the air horns on the trucks being sounded, used for only emergencies to tell the people inside to get out immediately. Turns out there was a basement fully engulfed in flames below us and was seen by another firefighter who happened to see it from a small basement window. This is unusual for houses to have basements here in the southeast. Another crew was inside by the time they called for the evacuation, and they also made it out. The fire went on for about 7 hours afterwards due to the size, and that the water main which supplied us water had broken. I was later told and saw that the floor we had been standing on, where I felt the intense head, had collapsed into the fully engulfed basement below within about 1 minute of us leaving. Story 32. Before my husband and I were married with good jobs, we were young and poor and didn't care where we lived. We rented out a poor little house behind the landlord's house that was clearly a shed poorly transformed into a small studio space. At the time, I worked late nights and my husband worked mornings, so I would sleep till around 12 and work all night. The landlord, Greg, was this bald old man with a heavy Russian accent. He was kind of odd, but seemed nice. So was his wife. He'd made odd comments and invite me into his house to FaceTime. At the time, it was a different program. I can't remember what the OG online face chat was, with his friends in Russia. One time I complained the chipmunks were crawling into the roof, asked to patch it up better, and he said, "Bah, no need. I take care." And I swear to God he would snatch them up with his bare hands and break their necks. I wish I was making that up. Weird, he made me feel uneasy, but seemed kind to us. When we first moved in, I kept waking up feeling uneasy when I should have been exhausted. I'd feel nervous and get up, check the doors, check closets, ECT. One week my husband went away to visit his father and I was alone and literally felt like I was constantly being watched. The bedroom window was back in the yard and it was heavily wooded. I'd hear crunching of leaves and footsteps all the time. My husband said I was being paranoid because I was alone, and I thought so too. But then, that same week my husband was away, I offered to watch my friend's dog. So I get home from work around 2 a.m. and get to sleep around 3, 4 a.m. I wake up around 8, 9 a.m. to the dog barking and growling like a made man. Now, because the space was similar to a studio, we had no doors on anything besides the bathroom. I spring up and see Greg the landlord literally in the living room, hand on the front door just frozen. He was caught off guard by the dog, and I yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" I thought the house was on fire or something, and I know the front door was locked. I always locked it. He quickly apologized and walked out. When I shook from my sleepy daze, I realized maybe this wasn't a one-time thing. I took a shower, dressed, and walked up to their house. Greg's car wasn't in the driveway, but his wife was home. I told her what happened and asked why Greg would use his keys to go in the house without giving me notice. She was nonchalant about it and replied, "It's his house, he can do what he wants." He liked to check on things from time to time. I flipped out on her. Clearly this was happening often, and the eerie feeling I was getting him 10,000% sure was Greg literally coming in the house, watching me sleep, completely invading my privacy when he knew I was alone and asleep. We noped the fudge out of there as soon as we could. He actually tried to take us to small claims court for breaking the lease, but I had already reported him to the police and found out the space we were renting wasn't even up to code or on the books to be rented. Story 33. Apologies for the wall of text. This happened a couple of years ago at the church I attend. One day, this young lady in her mid-20s started attending our services. She was very polite and friendly and seemed eager to be a part of our congregation. After several weeks, she started bringing her brother, who I'll call Brody, along with her. He was slightly younger than her and seemed nice enough. The more time I spent around him, however, I began to realize how different he was. He was very socially awkward, with odd mannerisms and speech patterns, but I just assumed he was autistic or something, so that wasn't a big deal. I didn't become alarmed until I noticed how fixated Brody was becoming on our pastor and his wife. He constantly followed them around like a puppy, begging for their attention and growing upset when they associated with anyone besides him. Once, while walking beside our pastor, I looked across the parking lot to see Brody giving me the most hateful stare you can imagine. I was instantly creeped out. From that moment, I knew something was dangerously wrong with this man, but no one else seemed to notice it. Fast forward to several weeks later. I walk into church for the Wednesday night service to find our pastor alone, without his wife or children. He tells me he sent his family away to a safe place for a few days. Apparently, Brody had called the pastor's wife and had threatened to assault and murder her. Luckily, he couldn't find a car to borrow, or he very likely would have carried out his threats. After the police came and placed him in custody, it was revealed that Brody had done this exact thing several times before to other women. It was all such a surreal experience. I've wondered if perhaps I should have spoken up about my early suspicions, but part of me thinks I would have just been laughed off or dismissed.